Shalom, everyone. My name is Amos, or more formally, Professor Amos Nadan. I'm the head of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, the largest, by far, Middle Eastern research center in Israel. Joining me in this evening is Professor Meir Litvak, who heads our sister institute, the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies. Both of our centers are based at Tel Aviv University, and we work very closely together on a wide range of regional issues. And together with us, there are several researchers from the Dayan Center and from the Alliance Center. I won't mention their names right now. In short, all of them are brilliant and amazing scholars. Just last night, we held a similar webinar in Hebrew, which had tremendous turnout with hundreds of participants. So we felt it was important to offer a similar event in English as well, especially for our friends and supporters around the world. I want to thank personally to Richard Sincere and Ricky Alone, co-chairs of the Moshe Dayan Center's advisory board, for encouraging us to organize this English language session. Now, let's turn to the Middle East. As you all know, in October 2023, Hamas launched a brutal invasion into Israel, murdered hundreds of civilians and security persons, and kidnapping many others. At that moment, there was a real fear for Israel's security, surrounded by enemies in what known as the axis of resistance, whose declared goal is to destroy Israel and target Jews, and after that, of course, to target the so-called infidels more broadly. Today, the picture has changed significantly. Yes, we're still operating in Gaza, and sadly, the war there is not over. Israeli hostages remain in captivity. Bringing them home remains the country's top priority. However, this no longer has an existential threat to many Israelis as it was in the past. In the north, Hezbollah is not fully engaged in the fighting. Syria has now a new president who, despite his jihadist background, might be interested in normalizing relations with Israel, as suggested by President Trump. The Houthis in Yemen, though still firing missiles from time to time, are also pose an existential don't pose an existential threat. The main threat today remains Iran. Iran directly attacked Israel during the current conflict and now finds itself under heavy counterattack. At least officially, the aim of Israel is to eliminate or at least delay Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. Beyond the military front, we are seeing something fascinating in the region. More and more states, those that value sovereignty and stability over jihadist or imperialist fantasies, are seeking alignment with Israel in hope of fostering a new regional order with support from the US and other allies like the G7 that declared today that they are with Israel. Militarily, the Israeli operation have seen success within the limits of what the IDF and other agencies can realistically achieve. Just today, the military announced they will need a few more days to complete a significant phase of operation on Iranian land. At the same time, we are hearing serious questions from Arab allies and within Israeli society itself about the long-term goals. Why is it Israel working more urgently toward ending the war in Gaza, or especially if it can secure the return of the hostages? What exactly the objectives in Iran? There is a growing pressure on decision makers to move from military action to political negotiations. To do that wisely, they'll need insights from people who study the region in depth, and that's where we come in. So now, Let's move to a set of short expert analyses. Each speaker will have up to 7 minutes, well, 7 minutes in Israeli or Jewish time, which may be a bit flexible. Afterward, we'll open the floor to your questions. Please feel free to submit them using the Q&A function here in the webinar. And with that, I hand things over to my colleague and friend, Professor Meir Litvak, head of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies. Meir.
Good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to cooperate once again with the Dayan Center in this important webinar. I will talk briefly about Iran and Israeli strategy vis-a-vis Iran. The major issue, of course, is the nuclear issue. Iran had been pursuing a nuclear option, not necessarily a bomb, for many years. Because it is a paranoid regime, it was afraid mainly that the US will try to topple it. Iran saw nuclear capability as an insurance policy against foreign attacks. It also saw it as an issue of national honor. If you have nuclear capability, you belong to, you can say, the major league. If you are not, you are in the minor leagues. Until now, Iran was not pursuing what we can call weaponization. The reason for the Israeli attack has been the failure of the negotiations with the US and the Israeli fear, maybe even intelligence, that Iran has decided to pursue weaponization. Now, Iran was interested in negotiations with the US, but under its own terms. And maybe it has decided to go nuclear because its previous strategy, original strategy of relying on ballistic missiles and on relying on its proxies has failed. As my colleague Amos Nadan mentioned, Hamas has suffered a major blow, Hezbollah suffered a major blow, the removal of Assad, a major ally, left Iran bereft of regional allies. Also, the ballistic missiles are a powerful weapon, but have not delivered the blow to Israel the Iranians had expected. Maybe this was the reason why they decided to go nuclear. At the same time, as in Israelis, we should be wary or aware of our limitations. We have technical problems in fully eliminating the Iranian underground nuclear facilities. Here, as an Israeli, I'm saying that if Israel hoped that it would drag the US into the war, it could prove to be a mistake. Let me talk about another important issue of regime change in Iran. Various Israeli spokesmen speak about the Israeli goal of removing the Iranian regime. Now, the Iranian regime is a vicious regime. It is an extremely anti-Israeli regime, also, by the way, anti-Semitic regime. But in my view, it would be a mistake to believe that we can topple the Iranian regime from the outside. The Iranian regime is powerful, it is brutal, it is ready to use force, repressive means to suppress the population, which still suffers, and I cannot blame them, from fear. It lacks organization. The Iranian regime controls the internet, so it prevents the opposition from organizing. So I would be cautious as an Israeli for making rash statements about our intentions or our capability to topple the regime. I do believe that the Iranian regime has been weakened. I do believe that it will suffer more serious problems and crises in the weeks to come. But it is not for outsiders to topple the regime. It is, as an Israeli, I'm saying it, I think it is beyond Israel's capabilities. It should be left to the people of Iran. I would stop here and give the other speakers the chance to speak.
Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Franco. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Moshe Dayan Center. Thank you all for joining us. Just two administrative points before we move on with the speakers. The first is, as Professor Nadan had already mentioned, if you look at the bottom of the screen, of the webinar screen, you can find the Q&A button. If you would like to ask the speakers any questions about whatever they had to say, you can click that button and submit a question, and we will be sure to take these into consideration when we ask them questions in the end. The second administrative point that I would like to make before we move on is that most of the speakers are currently situated in Israel, and unfortunately, we do experience the occasional missile attacks. And so if that happens and we are forced to stop temporarily for that reason, we will stop for a little while and then do our best to proceed as soon as possible. With that in mind, I would like to hand over to Dr. Harel Chorev.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. I would like to address basically two themes in the Palestinian arena and their reactions to the war in Iran. I will divide it between the public arena and the political one. Generally speaking, we see a lot of joy, I would say, when any barrage is falling down of missiles is falling down. We see it in Gaza, we see it in the West Bank, and all sorts of stories being told on the networks online. However, since the Palestinian echo chamber is not totally closed, but rather open to I would say, the general Arab discourse, they cannot ignore what is going on basically in the discourse regarding the war with other I would say crowd audiences around the Arab world, which see basically, literally, the planes above their heads, and understand I would call it the greatness of the hour. They see the publicity. They see the press. They see authors writing that the axis of resistance concept is collapsing. So I would say both things that people want to believe, that Israel is weak and being hit by Iran, and what they actually see and read by other witnesses that actually see what is going on. Regarding the political level, I will divide it between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. I would say the war would not affect, if I had to assume, the war would not affect Hamas in a way that it will have an immediate ramifications, for example, on the hostages deal, which is obviously in the middle of our attention and minds and hearts. And the reason is very simple. For quite a while, I would say a year or so, the Palestinians, or Hamas more accurately, is aware of the fact that Iran cannot support it in the way it hoped it will, with all this idea of the unifications of the front, which basically was the strategy behind the October 7 attack. They understood it, I think, some good months ago, or even a year ago, that Iran is not as strong as they thought it was. So in that sense, it won't affect, I would say, to a large extent. However, in the long run, there is no doubt that what is going on is dramatic. It's dramatic, it's crucial, and it's breaking up the strategic framework which within the Hamas had worked in at least since 2008, more or less, alongside with Hezbollah and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which, by the way, is another powerful player which we usually don't mention, but we're talking about several thousands of terrorists in that organization, which is a full proxy of Iran. But Hamas obviously is the main power there, and I think the ramifications of what is going on in Iran at the moment will break finally the connection between Iran and Hamas. Not only because the hits that Hamas is receiving that Iran is being hit at the moment, but also as a long term, I would say, understanding that Iran is not the support they thought it will. It will, I would say, combine with a long-standing debate within Hamas between what we may call the pro-Iranian group and the non-pro-Iranian group. I wouldn't call them anti-Iranian group, but the pro-Iranian group, which takes it look for other players as a support, such as Saudi Arabia, such as other moderate Arab countries, Egypt, obviously. And I think this will gradually get stronger and stronger, alongside the fact that the most powerful, I would say, supporter of the Iranian concept was the military wing of Ezzedine al-Qassam, which is now extremely weakened. And it means that Hamas leadership at the outside set the tone. As for the Palestinian Authority, I think despite all its problems, and it has a lot of problems, it looks like it will come stronger out of this conflict as the only option, basically, as the moderate option, as the legitimate option in international terms. And eventually, I think it will work for them rather for Hamas. And therefore, to summarize my talk, I would say we should basically, most of the ramifications of the war would be in the long run, I would say. Thank you very much.
Amos,
Yeah, Brendan?
yeah. So I was asked to make several comments about the Arab Gulf states. I'll try to keep my remarks brief. The reports yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that the Iranians are seeking de-escalation was most likely seeded and planted by the Arab Gulf states, who also want to see de-escalation and diplomacy and an end to the war as soon as possible. And that's consistent with the Saudi point of view in particular. They want to see stability in the region. They see this war, as they see other wars in the past between Israel and its regional enemies, as a source of radicalization and mobilization of their populations, and it deeply concerns them in terms of their own regime security. So that's point number one. The second point is the Saudis in particular see Israeli success as potentially setting the stage for Israeli regional dominance or regional hegemony, if you will. And they fear the effects of Israeli dominance on this particular Israeli right-wing government and its attitudes towards the Palestinian issue, which means, in other words, they fear if Israel has an overwhelming success in this war, and I realize we're not yet done, that it will make resolving the Palestinian issue in a way that they would like to see it resolved much more difficult. The third issue is, for the Saudis in particular, their Vision 2030 reform program is really a program for development and progress in terms of their domestic economies. And they're very much concerned that the ongoing war is going to make enlisting or bringing in foreign direct investment much more difficult. They're concerned about the threats to the various different reform projects that they have underway. And so first and foremost, they want to preserve what they see as their recipe for future success, which is Vision 2030. The fourth point, the United Arab Emirates in particular On the one hand, Abu Dhabi would be happy to see Israel deal a severe blow to Iran's nuclear program. On the other hand, the Emiratis have tried and worked very hard since 2019 to de-escalate with the Iranians. Dubai, in particular, sees Iran as a very valued trade partner and is likely to profit from the ongoing war and the war economy. But I think ultimately the Emirates sort of have a position where they're happy to see this particular Iranian regime take a serious blow, although they won't say it publicly. The fifth point, Qatar and the Omanis are playing a role in, I think, of trying to pass Iranian messages to the United States, sort of trying to play a broker mediator role. And again, I think a lot of the media attention we've seen in the last 24 to 48 hours about the Iranians being ready for some kind of de-escalation may in fact be a result of that mediation role. The sixth point, we're likely to see as a result of the Qataris losing Iran as a backer, and Iran was a valuable backer to the Qataris between 2017 and 2021, during the period in which the Emiratis and the Saudis blockaded and boycotted Qatar as a result of Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood and its support for Iran. We're likely to see Qatar move closer to Turkey if it loses its sort of backing from Iran as a result of this war. It's important to emphasize that Qatar also shares its very valuable gas infrastructure and gas fields. It shares they're adjacent to Iran's gas and energy infrastructure, so Qatar is extremely concerned about the possibility of a wider Israeli military operation on Karg Island, for example, which is the nerve center of the Iranian oil export industry, and Iran's gas field, the South Pars gas field, which again lies it's an offshore gas field that lies adjacent to Qatar's gas fields. Finally, I think if Israel does succeed in fully destroying or setting back Iran's nuclear program in a meaningful way, and this is a bit of a forward-looking comment, we can expect the Arab Gulf states, in particular the Saudis, with support from perhaps the Egyptians and the Jordanians, to take a much stronger line on turning the Middle East into a weapons mass destruction-free zone, which will be essentially a diplomatic campaign of pressure against Israel with respect to Israel's reported nuclear program. I'll just say that in the last 48 hours, as a concluding remark, we've seen a lot of opinion pieces, both in Arabic and in English, in the Arab Gulf-controlled media, suggesting that the Iranian regime is sort of in preserve the regime mode. I have no idea if that's true or not, but the message that they seem to be saying is that the Iranians are looking for some kind of safe phasing solution that will allow them to preserve the regime. And I think that's sort of where the Gulf stands today. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brandon Friedman from the Moshe Dayan Center, now Dr. Joel Parker from the Moshe Dayan Center. Joel?
Thank you.
Joel will speak about Syria and Lebanon. Yeah.
Thank you, Amos. Thank you for having me here at the Moshe Dayan Center and the Alliance Center joint meeting. I want to talk about the Northern Front in Israel, which has actually been thankfully quiet in the last 3 or 4 days, which is something that has been nice for Israel, but it also has certainly an explanation. I want to talk about 2 kinds of neutrality. We see that both Lebanon and Syria have been neutral in the Iran-Israel conflict right now. And I think there's different reasons for that. Firstly, I'll talk about Lebanon, and Lebanon is really more of the surprise neutrality because, in a sense, Hezbollah, the main proxy that Iran has invested in for decades, was formed in Lebanon with one of its aims was, in fact, to join in an attack on Israel if Israel were to ever get into a direct confrontation with Iran. It was one of the purposes and the raison d'etre of Hezbollah. In one sense. And so I think that the fact that Hezbollah chose not to get involved in this conflict speaks volumes of the weakness of the axis of resistance. It's one of the most obvious pieces of evidence we can look at to see that the axis of resistance has been essentially paralyzed, at least in the immediate region of Israel. We still see, obviously, the Houthis are acting. We'll learn about that more. But Hezbollah has taken the back seat here. And even the Lebanese analysts that I see are kind of questioning among themselves why that is. One reason, obviously, is that Hezbollah has been weakened due to the confrontation with Israel over the last year and the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, its leader, and great devastation inside Lebanon has left it with very few resources. And I think another thing that maybe we should think about is the fact that if Lebanon were to get involved, certainly there would be a strong reaction from Israel, and that would affect the Lebanese political dynamic, but it would also affect Hezbollah directly, because if Hezbollah were to suffer further damage, I'm saying material damage from Israel, it's not likely that Iran would come back and bail them out or give them money to rebuild their infrastructure. So I think that Hezbollah is seeing Iran weakened and realizing like there's no gain for them in this conflict. So let's turn to Syria, because Syria is a different kind of neutrality. Syria is a neutrality kind of like friends with benefits. It's a neutrality that has a positive side to it, because Syria's neutrality has actually been helping Israel in a lot of ways actively. Not that Syria has the ability to stop Israel or to prevent Israel from flying over it, but essentially Israel has used the Syrian airspace on virtually every one of its flights to Iran. And Syria has not really objected to that. So we've seen a bit of objections from Iraq, but almost nothing from Syria. And in fact, I think there's even a little bit of a wink, wink, nod, nod sense that the new regime in Damascus is in favor of Israel weakening Iran. One of the reasons for that is that basically Syria would benefit indirectly from having having the axis of resistance weakened further, because Iran was one of the essential pillars of the Assad regime. And with Iran unable to reform its axis, that would give the Syrian regime more space to continue to build its regime. I think one thing people maybe don't quite realize is that the Syrian regime is very fragile and very new and hasn't been able to incorporate many elements of the Syrian society into it. And so the more space it has to politically maneuver, the better chances Syria actually has of maybe forging a broader democratic basis for the new government, which of course would lead to more stability. So all of this essentially means that if everything turns out the way Israel wants it to turn out, I think we will see Syria benefiting indirectly. So Syria's neutrality, I think, also does have some risks, by the way. They've had many drones fly over Syria that have been shot down in Syrian airspace, and some of them have fallen on houses. The Syrians have shown many pictures of that online. And one thing I will just add is that there are some Syrians and some Lebanese who also see the Iranian attack on Israel as in some way a positive thing. I wouldn't say that they're all crying about it. Some of them do see Israel as still an enemy. And my hope is that obviously this is one step in a process towards normalization, probably with Syria before Lebanon. But in any case, I think that right now the populations of both countries are still, in a sense, sitting by their phones or televisions and eating popcorn, just watching it happen. And I'll stop here because I don't really want to take up time from other speakers.
Thank you very much, Joel. So until now, we just spoke about the Middle East. Meir Litvak spoke about Iran, Harel Chorev about the Palestinian, Brendan Friedman, the Gulf state, Joel Parker, Syria and Lebanon. And now, guess what? The USA is also part of the Middle East, although not geographically. And Chelsi Mueller, Dr. Chelsi Mueller is about to discuss this. Chelsi?
Yes, thank you, Amos. And thank you to the Dayan Center team that helped put this together in the last few days. And I also just want to take a minute to welcome all my students that are joining from Embry-Riddle in Florida. I saw you guys are here, so thank you for being here. I volunteered to provide some observations about the US as an actor, and I elected to focus my short talk on President Trump. and his coercive diplomacy toward Iran. In preparation for this short talk, I assembled a chronology of his statements on the subject over the last 2 months, during the course of his negotiations with Iran that were headed up by Steve Witkoff. And I had a close look to try to understand how he's approaching this and going about this. I'm going to stop short of delving into the chances for success, because I'm approaching this as a historian. But I think it's worthwhile to look at his statements and to try to understand how this has played out for him over the course of the last couple of months. Trump is not known for his clear and consistent messaging. I'm often confused by him. Many times I feel as though he says one thing and then the next day he contradicts himself or makes a wild off-the-cuff statement that leaves many people confused about his true intentions. But in the next 7 minutes, I'm gonna just lay out a case that throughout this, what I would characterize as a joint US-Israel campaign, to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons program, I'm gonna just make the case that he's actually been astonishingly clear and consistent. So negotiations kicked off just a little more than 2 months ago in Oman on the 12th of April. And when this initiative began, Trump basically declared multiple times, in so many words, Iran, you've got 60 days to dismantle your nuclear weapons program at the negotiating table, or to face its elimination through military strikes that are going to kill a lot of people. And he made no secret that the consequences for not signing on a deal would be a US-supported Israeli military strike on Iran. And then after precisely 60 days of negotiations, during which time Iran engaged in its signature delaying maneuvers and failed to accept any of Trump's offers, on day 61, which was last Friday, between Thursday and Friday morning, June 13th, during the early morning hours when it was still dark here and in Iran, Israel launched its spectacular preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear program. What's remarkable is that the attack was a complete surprise to Iran and to everyone, even though Trump had basically advertised the exact date. It seems to me if we had just listened to what he was saying, we could have almost written it on our calendars. So think about that. From April 12th, when negotiations began, till June 13th was 60 days. So Trump, the statements that he made when he embarked on that diplomatic path, they were very clear and concise about what was planned. Many commentators are pushing the narrative that Israel's preemptive strike was divergent from the direction that Trump had wanted to go in, which was the diplomatic track, negotiations, and that there's a lot of daylight between Jerusalem and Washington. And that's a valid point of view. However, I would argue otherwise. I think that in part, those perceptions were fueled by some statements that were deliberately crafted to deceive Iran, especially on the eve of the attack, in order to preserve the element of surprise. It worked. Now we know that Trump's statement last week, in which he said he opposes an Israeli attack on Iran, was just as much fake as Netanyahu's supposed plans to take a vacation up north. And it stands to reason that the US and Israel have crafted an undisclosed plan. I would kind of think of it as an if-then strategy, which also sets out the conditions that could potentially lead to US offensive involvement, while strategically keeping that option in reserve on the chance that Iran has learned its lesson and will play ball according to Trump's rules. And here it's worthwhile to mention there's a lot of talk, US involvement, US not involvement. It's been established that the US is involved defensively It's working to intercept missiles and drones before they reach Israel's airspace, just as it did on the 13th of April and on the 1st of October last year. So I'm arguing that we're witnessing a coordinated, detailed plan that was hashed out more than 2 months ago, which is aimed at achieving a political resolution to the Iranian nuclear issue. On Friday, the campaign shifted into what military theorist Karl von Clausewitz has famously described as the politics by other means. In other words, the war phase. Yet, Trump has made it clear that the ultimate goal is still a political solution to the Iran nuclear issue. Many here in Israel are convinced that this can be solved if the US would just join the military offensive and perhaps hit the Fordow enrichment site. And that might happen. Trump did leave the door open for that. Israel has already set Iran's nuclear program back, and taking out Fordow would set it back even further. But let's be honest, military strikes can't erase Iran's technical knowledge of the nuclear fuel cycle. In other words, Iran would still have the know-how and could rebuild. So the ultimate goal is to see Iran accept that it will not be a nuclear weapon state, to dismantle its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program, and then to monitor its compliance with the international nuclear safeguards. What's truly fascinating about everything we're witnessing is how Trump is trying to strategically position the US as the intermediary between Iran and Israel. He's completely dismissive of Iran's long-held dichotomous worldview, the one in which the US stands as the great Satan on the one side and Iran, the mortal enemy, on the other. And he's trying to reposition the US as the key intercessor in Iran's conflict with Israel, which, if you think about it, it's weird and different. And he's trying to, well, I think we also see that he views the US as the ultimate enforcer by extending an outstretched hand to Iran and then applying the consequences for misbehavior, or alternatively standing aside as Israel applies the consequences. And then after that, he follows up with another chance to comply. We start to see a pattern emerge. He appears to be trying to condition Iran. We saw this at work when Iran canceled the 4th round of talks that were supposed to take place in Rome on the 3rd of May. So how did Trump respond to that bad behavior? Well, first, he took the possibility of local uranium enrichment completely off the table. And prior to that, he said he was undecided on that issue. But after that instance of bad behavior on the part of Iran, he just went into an interview and he explicitly took that card completely off the table, and he never looked back. No enrichment, he said, over and over and over again. And the second thing he did was he announced that he was going to rename the Persian Gulf and call it the Arabian Gulf, which was a credible threat given that he changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico. So his negotiating tactics were punitive and ruthless, and one is given the impression that it's as if he's trying to train a dog to just obey. Trump and Israel are now raising the stakes and advertising other punitive measures that can be taken if Iran doesn't capitulate, including the assassination of the supreme leader. And this is another credible threat, given Israel's spectacular record of high-profile assassinations, so it dramatically ratchets up the pressure. And this tough negotiating style repeats itself. Last week, we saw Trump offer a hand and then step aside to let Israel apply punitive consequences for not taking his hand, the spectacular events of Friday morning. And then we saw Trump offer another outstretched hand. Yesterday, as Trump was leaving the G7 summit in Canada, and here I bring it up to the present, his team proposed talks this week on a nuclear deal and an end to the war. Today, he said he is demanding from Iran nothing less than complete surrender. So in line with the pattern that he's established, the demand to surrender will be followed by an offer to sit at the table and sign a capitulation deal, a take it or leave it deal. And I say that because what he's offering amounts to a total surrender of Iran's nuclear weapons aspirations. And he's saying that non-compliance with the demand to sign it is going to be met with even more severe consequences. Conventional wisdom holds that Iran's nuclear program is a great source of national pride and sovereignty, and that any strategy failing to account for this nationalism without allowing Iran a way to save face is doomed to fail. As we see, Trump did not accept that rationale. Ultimately, Trump seems to view this as a situation where, and I'll end with this, with a quote from the Greek historian Thucydides, "The strong do what they have the power to do, and the weak accept what they have to accept."
Thank you very much, Chelsi. We'll now move to Dr. Rachel Kanz-Feder from the Alliance Center. But as we said to you, we are working together. So a part of dealing with Iranian studies, she also deals with Iraq and the Shia. So she'll speak about Iraq and the Shia militias.
Okay, thank you,
Rachel?
Amos. Thank you. I'd first like to say that I'm happy Iraq's importance to the unfolding conflict right now is reflected in its inclusion in this webinar. That's not always the case. Iraq, which has for years served as a critical economic and operative lifeline to Iran and to the axis of resistance, it's currently one of the most sensitive and important and overlooked theaters of the conflict at the moment. Of course, Iraq houses a significant military presence. It's characterized by entrenched Iranian influence and fragile state institutions, all of which I think make its position currently both precarious and pivotal. I'd like to point out that despite the fact that Iraq houses some of the most powerful, or what were, I guess, some of the most powerful factions of the resistance axis, actually, we can observe that Shiite militias in Iraq have enjoyed a certain measure of restraint from Israeli actions. And this restraint, I think, is not accidental, but rather shaped by the need for Israel to closely coordinate its moves with, of course, the United States. And in the Iraqi arena, this is particularly sensitive. Washington's strategic and security partnership with Iraq, I think we can say has been imposing some practical and political limitations on what Israel has been willing to do in order to act against some of Iran's proxies in Iraq. Now, having said that, when we're talking about the Shiite militias, that is not, the militias are by no means monolithic. We're talking about, generally speaking, two fragmented power centers or camps or factions. One, of course, being strongly pro-Iranian and comprised of militias that are aligned both ideologically, theologically, economically, and politically with Iran. And then we have another set of militias that we can say are most loyal to Ayatollah Sistani, who we know for years has also acted as a counterweight against Iranian influence in Iraq, and to other leaders such as Muqtada al-Sadr. And the militias that fall into this camp, of course, they prioritize Iraqi sovereignty and the state. In fact, there have been, throughout this year, there have been raging debates in Iraq about the disarmament of the militias, with the latter group or the second camp of militias that I just mentioned being in support of demilitarizing and laying down arms and returning, or trying to establish a monopoly on arms to the state. Now, I just will make one or two more quick points. I want to say that this fragmentation between the militias, or these camps of militias, has been more pronounced since October 7th. And we see that Prime Minister of Iraq, Mohammed al-Sudani, has really been trying to maintain, I guess if Joel was talking about different types of neutrality, then here we can talk about a sort of discrete neutrality by which it can preserve its relations and ties between Iraq and the United States, between Iraq and Iran, and between Iraq and other Arab neighbors, and preserve the momentum that it had previously of reintegrating into the Arab orbit. And of course, in doing all of this, also trying to maintain internal domestic stability. So I think that Iraq's position right now really much depends on Prime Minister Soudani's ability to navigate this sort of complex web of relationships and pressures and tensions. And if, of course, if the United States is to take a more active role in Israeli efforts to eliminate or to degrade Iranian nuclear capabilities, the first camp of militias, the pro-Iranian militias, have been issuing threats repeatedly to the American forces stationed in Iraq. All the while other leaders are trying to rein in the militias and to keep Iraq from being dragged into further kinetic conflict between Israel and Iran, and of course Israel and potentially the United States and in Iran right now. I would just end with one or two points. The entrenchment of Iranian influence in Iraq has been made possible by a certain degree of American acquiescence to this reality and status quo. In the very beginning of Trump's presidency, there were certain signals that this may no longer be the position of a Trump administration, and that in fact, there are some elements within the Republican Party and within Trump's base that would like to see Washington confront Tehran's nefarious influence and activities in Iraq and no longer choose to preserve the status quo and stability over confronting what Iran has been doing in terms of exploiting the Iraqi economy, of course, arming and building up militias and so forth. I would say that until 24 hours ago, all players, Israel, Prime Minister al-Sudani, and so forth, have been doing an okay job of keeping Iraq from being drawn directly into the fire. But last night in Baghdad, Basra, and Karbala, and I might be missing some other places, we witnessed demonstrations throughout Iraq calling to get rid of the American presence now, which of course the agreement for America's presence in Iraq is supposed to go up in September 24. And so now we see militia leaders, issuing threats to prevent Trump from becoming, in the American administration, from becoming more actively involved. So as the street is heating up, so to speak, so we'll see to what extent Iraq will be able to maintain this precarious, discrete neutrality in the current conflict. Of course, everything depends on Trump's next moves, particularly in regards to the Iraqi arena as well. And there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rachel. We'll now move to Dr. Joshua Krasna from the Moshe Dayan Center. A quick note about Josh's activity. Josh is the co-head of our Forum for Regional Cooperation, where we cooperate with people from the Arab world and other countries on usually not very discussed topic. Like it's topic where we discuss different aspects with these people, connect academia with the real world. And Josh is, in fact, one of the key person who involved with that. So Josh, please.
Thank you. So in order to understand the effects of the recent Israeli-Iranian combat on the energy market, we need to understand what was going on in the energy market before it started. Because if we look, right, right after the this is we can see where the combat began, right? This is the price of oil. It was about 65 the end of last week, and it opened this morning at 74.65, $1.76 for Brent crude. So we see within a week a rise of some 13%. However, if we look over the past year, we understand that the past 3 months prices have been abnormally low. And they've been abnormally low because on the 2nd of April, right, President Trump announced his tariffs, which led to expectations that there would be a global recession, and which led to a sharp drop in oil price. And oil prices began to stagger back up. And then in the beginning of May, the OPEC Plus announced that it was going to ease its production cuts again. A process that had begun already over the next 3 months, so that they will be adding another 2 million barrels of oil daily by the end of the year. By the way, that 2 million barrels of oil is more than enough to cover the entire number of exports of oil from Iran. So going into last week, right, we're less than a week into this, there was oversupply of both oil and, by the way, of gas. There's been a surplus in the gas worldwide, despite the removal of much Russian gas from the market in 2022, 2023, and there are new gas projects constantly coming online and being planned. So we have oversupply of oil and gas and an abnormally low price before this conflict began. That's important because then when they say, well, the price jumped 13%, yes, but it jumped from a very low baseline. Now, how can this conflict affect international energy markets, right? So there's several ways. So the first is, and the easiest, and the one that most of the journalists talk about, which is the least interesting, right, has to do with Iran as a producer itself, right? In this, the effect on the global market will not be particularly high. And the reason it will not be particularly high, the reason it will not be particularly high is because Iran is the 7th largest producer of gas in the world, of oil in the world. It used to be higher because of the sanctions, and over time it has gone down, and now it is providing about 5% of the world's gas, but producing about 5% of the world's gas. But this is actually, again, a little bit confusing because the 4.3 million barrels a day they produce, only 1.6 or so of that is exported. So in fact, Iran is not it's a major oil producer, but not one of the big oil producers, right? A country like Saudi Arabia produces 3 times more. The United States produces 3 times more. Russia produces almost 3 times more, but also a very unimportant oil exporter, right? And its oil is mostly sold to private refineries in China, which are known as teapot refineries, who have been buying less in recent weeks due to U.S. pressure through their secondary sanctions, right? They were buying them as false flagged as Malaysian oil. If you look at the details that the International Energy Agency publishes, you'll see that suddenly Malaysia became one of the major producers and exporters of oil in the world. It's not Malaysia, it's Iran. They're buying Iranian oils, and the Americans, once at the end of the Biden administration, but especially once the Trump administration began to sanction these private refineries, and therefore they're buying less and less. Regarding gas,
Josh,
Iran,
you're muted.
Yes, Iran is the 3rd largest producer of gas in the world, 3rd largest producer of gas in the world, right? But as an exporter of gas, so this is exports of petroleum gas in 2023. By the way, it's gone down since then. We're looking at who the biggest exporter is. This is Iran, right here. This is Iran down here. Iran is a very small exporter of gas. And one of the reasons is Iran has a very limited liquefaction capability and is not able to liquefy gas, and mostly exports to Iraq, right, where it is a very important source of gas, and where, in fact, almost every year Iraq has serious problems when Iran doesn't export gas to them. It was, until quite recently, a major exporter to Turkey. By the way, Turkey in the past year has been importing more and more from the United States and less from Iran, and it exports to Pakistan as well. So if it comes off as a producer, right? If what we're worried about is what happens if Iranian oil and gas come off the world market, the answer is not much. Right? There's enough excess capability. The OPEC producers, because they have been cutting back so much over the past few years, have a spare capacity of about 6 million barrels a day, right? When we said Iran is exporting 1.6 million, it can easily be covered. Whether they want to cover it or not is a good question, because by taking the Iranians out, the price of oil rises. There's really no reason for them to replace the Iranian oil and bring the price back down again, right? But the predominant possible effects of war. So we said the effect of taking Iranian oil and gas out of the mix is not very, very significant. But there are three other predominant possible effects, and I think they're more important, right? So any one of them important, as in any combination. First, of course, the expansion of the war, with Iran attacking Gulf Arab states, either themselves or the U.S. troops and installations, and especially attacking oil and gas installations in other states in the Gulf. That could theoretically lead to a slowing down of oil and gas production. It could lead to a slowing down of oil and gas exports, raise the price. The second, of course, the closure of the Hormuz Straits. 20% of the world's total petroleum liquids consumed go through the Straits of Hormuz, 26% of the world's seaborne oil exports, and 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas go through the Straits of Hormuz. So that is another way in which this can significantly affect it. And the third is the perception of the risk of the above occurring as reflected in energy futures and maritime insurance rates. In 2019, there were attacks on some shipping in the Gulf, and the maritime insurance rates went up so high that for several weeks there were no maritime shipping in the Gulf. The freight rate for tankers has already risen since last Friday by 20%. Right? Some big companies are refusing Gulf contracts right now because they're not sure if they want to get involved. Tankers traversing Gulf waters today, right? This is 5 days in, are now already required to spend extra $3 to $8 a barrel on insurance. That means that the transport costs are significant, and that means that not only is it more expensive right now to export gas, but to export oil before anything has happened, it also means that, as I said, shippers are not that interested in going into the Gulf, and this added cost could alter the economics of the crude trade. So the Houthis have proved to us, right? You don't need to actually sink any ships, and you don't need to shoot too many missiles. The uncertainty is enough to begin to significantly inflate the trade. So there could be a cascade rate, right? The operators are opting out, the insurers are hiking rates, and therefore it's difficult to find carriers who are going to take out the oil. But this is over time, because as I said, right now there's an oversupply of oil. How likely it will be that Iran would pursue such steps is an extremely pertinent question. Right? The Straits of Hormuz have never been closed for more than very short times, even during the Iran-Iraq War. It would, by the way, put paid to the détente that Iran and the Gulf states, notably Saudi Arabia and UAE, have been pursuing for the past 4 years, right? If Iran attacked their gas and oil installations, or if Iran took steps to significantly disrupt trade through the Straits of Hormuz, that would be an act of war regarding these other states as well. And these are states which Iran has been making a significant effort in the past few years to try to improve its relations with them. In the long term, it does not serve, I don't say it's not going to happen, never say never, but it will not serve Iran's geopolitical, geoeconomic, or long-term interests for them to carry out this kind of activity, which would harm countries which right now are not involved in the war. On the supply side, by the way, as I said, first of all, it's not necessarily a bad thing for the other producers. They'll be able to make more and more money, not if the Straits of Hormuz are closed, but if the Straits of Hormuz aren't closed, they'll be able to export more, to produce more. Their ambitious development plans, which Brandon mentioned, are dependent on a high oil price. One of the interesting things, the current price rally with the price going up, right, is enabling U.S. shale producers to lock in forward prices, which is good for them because they have, some of them, been thinking about leaving the fields for now because the price has sunk so low. And I'll just say one last point. One country that's already suffering on the energy front from the situation is Egypt. Egypt is highly dependent on Israeli piped gas to meet its domestic demand, and Israeli gas production exports have been suspended since Friday. And this is a situation which is similar to the situation that was in October, November 2023. And October, November 2023, Egypt was extremely distressed by the fact that Israeli gas exports had stopped. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Josh, Dr. Joshua Krasna. We have few minutes to add about Meir. Would you be able to speak a bit more about Iran?
Let me add, I want to add a few points to Josh Krasna's very interesting analysis about Iran and oil. Iran fits the old Jewish proverb about the shoemaker who goes barefoot. Iran is a major oil producer, but Iran suffers from a shortage of oil and shortage of gas because of mismanagement,
So
because
it's a
of
net importer of gas.
yes, absolutely. Because of mismanagement, because of aging facilities of oil refineries and gas liquidation, and Iran is an oil net importer. Iran, because of this mismanagement, Iran suffered in the last year persistent electricity outages in major cities, which will exacerbate in the next 2 months when the summer heat reaches new records. Add that to the water crisis in Iran, add that to high inflation and other problems, and before the war that will now exacerbate after the war. The Iranian regime is going to face major problems and confrontations in the near future, largely because of this oil problem, which they have completely mismanaged in the past 20 years.
That's it, Meir.
I think we maybe could leave time for questions, and if not, then I can
Okay, good.
I can then
So-
go a few more points on Iran.
Okay, so I'll ask Jonathan Franco, one of our postdoc fellows, to ask the questions that he collected from your questions.
Thank you, Amos. So let's go one by one, starting with you, Professor Amos Nadan. We were asked here, how would a successful, whatever successful means, how would a successful campaign in Iran affect the Israel-Gaza war that is also currently ongoing?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, we have a problem with the definition in Israel. We're not sure what is really the target of the war in Gaza and with Iran. Like, there isn't any formal letter or plan by the government. But if we think that the major aim is, in fact, to reduce the possibility of the Iranian, in fact, to have atomic bomb in the next few years. So it means that we speak about fairly short war. It would be short if the American would intervene. It would likely not be so short if not. If we're speaking about Iran, news from today, Iran asked again and again to stop the war, or at least to have a ceasefire announcement like, okay, if there is a phone call from the US president, we can stop everything and sort it out, and saying we never try to have atomic bombs and so on and so forth. So in fact, if we look at that war, if this is the aim to reach a deal, as Chelsi also mentioned, so it is likely that eventually we'll reach that in a short period. The real problem with Gaza is that, in fact, there isn't any plan currently, because the plan currently is basically to eliminate capabilities from Hamas. But the question who comes next is not there. And there are several offers now about the day after in Gaza that none of them, as far as we know, was taken seriously. There are a suggestion of bringing back the Palestinian Authority with support from Arab states, approved by the Arab state. Israel said, no, we will deal with that later on. So it's really the decision about the war in Gaza, ending or not, is hardly depending on Israel on the one hand. On the other hand, we have to remember that we have terrorists on the other side, Hamas. They are not well organized as they were in the past. There is a significant diversity in management between in Gaza Strip and outside Gaza Strip. So in fact, it's depend on Israel, but not only. So the question is whether it influences or not. It's basically goes to a significant player in the Middle East that became to be even more significant than ever, and the name of that player is Israel.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Professor Meir Litvak. We spoke, a major question that arises in the questions that we received is about the stability of the Iranian regime. I would love if you could tell us a bit about the Iranian opposition, if it even exists, which forces are part of the Iranian opposition, does any of them carry any kind of political weight?
Okay, let me say first about the strengths and weaknesses of the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime in this war has suffered or shown two major weaknesses, one which I did not mention in my opening speech. If we look at some of the Israeli actions, especially the really impressive attacks on the high personnel of the army, assassinations of nuclear scientists, and also some facilities. What they show, in addition, the excellent Israeli intelligence shows that Iran is completely penetrated by Israel, and as Iranians even concede themselves, something is very rotten in Iran. There are people in Iran, in the establishment, in the military, or elsewhere, who pass information to the Israelis. This is what now the Iranian media speaks of, which shows that the Iranian system is rotten from within, or there is a major problem within the regime. This is not only, if I was Khamenei, I would be very distrustful of my high command. I would be very distrustful both of their capabilities, but also that who is the traitor and who is the honest person among them. This is one very important weakness, which also then I would say reflect on the population. Another problem, by the way, the Iranian propaganda in the war now to their own people lies. Well, in what sense? They exaggerated their achievements vis-a-vis Israel. Many hundreds of Israelis have been killed, total destruction of cities, etc., which is major exaggeration. Usually there's a saying that the side who lies in the war is the losing side. If you are successful, you don't have to lie. Or very often, by the way, dictatorships tend to lie. It's more difficult for democracies to lie in the war to their people, I mean, to a certain large extent. Now, these are some weaknesses. At the same time, if you look at the opposition, the problem is that there is no organized opposition in Iran, because the regime has been very successful for the past 30 years of totally eliminating, uprooting any opposition in Iran. There are these opposition abroad, exiled opposition, and with all due respect, in my view, they're completely meaningless. They have no power, no influence inside Iran. The problem that the opposition in Iran suffers from is that there is no organization. Again, they destroyed every attempt of organizing opposition. I'll just elaborate in a second. The regime controls the internet, which means that it might be very difficult for people to organize, especially from city to city. There is no known leadership. There is no charismatic leader that can lead the opposition like there was Khomeini against the Shah in 1978. Again, there is no organization like the clergy, which existed. So these are major weaknesses. For instance, we have seen in the past year many strikes of employees in Iran striking over wage arrears or inflation or other problems. By the way, water shortages. The major problem in all of these strikes, they've been local, they've been sporadic, they never managed to take off, either to encompass large segments of Iran society or large areas in Iran, and therefore the regime could have overcome them. Now, this is on the weaknesses of the opposition. At the same time, if you look at historically, revolutions, very often revolutions came in surprise. No one expected them. There may be a point, it's now, 2 months from now, 5 years from now, that the people of Iran will decide that enough is enough, that they can no longer continue to suffer under this regime. They will overcome the barrier of fear, and then they may go in large numbers to the street. Another possibility is splits within the Iranian elite, some of them believing that it is essential to save the regime by pursuing other policies, or if the regime loses its self-confidence. So far, we have not seen it in Iran. Let me conclude this point by saying that there's a popular saying, which I did not invent it, so I like to quote it. Historically, every major revolution came as a surprise. In retrospect, as historians, we could see the processes leading to this revolution. Why do we miss predicting revolutions? Because in every revolution, there is a certain psychological element, which is totally unpredictable. People don't know how they will behave tomorrow, how they behave next week, and what their neighbors will say. Because of this unpredictable factor, we cannot predict revolutions. So for the time being, the regime seems to be sufficiently strong, but we are not prophets, we're historians.
Thank you. Dr. Brandon Friedman, we were asked about the Gulf states and their relations with the United States and the way that these relations impact the current American maneuvers in the Middle East. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Just a
Question.
second. There are several alarms in Israel, so if someone needs to go, that you have alarm one of the speakers, just go.
That's obviously very important. I just, in response to the question, there was an important article published in the Free Press in the United States by Jay Solomon, who's a very well-connected journalist to the American and other intelligence communities. And he argued the conversations in the intelligence community about this so-called joint American-Israeli plan, or how the Americans might support an Israeli plan, included three elements we haven't yet seen, which is an attack on Fordo, which Chelsi alluded to, which is the deep underground enrichment facility buried into the side of a mountain. An attack on Karg Island, again, I alluded to that in my earlier remarks, which is the nerve center of the Iranian oil industry. And the third point is perhaps if the Trump administration called to the Iranian public to overthrow the regime. We haven't seen either of any of these three things happen yet. I think the Arab Gulf states would publicly oppose an attack on Fordo and privately not raise too many objections to it. But I think that they would not want to see an attack on Karg Island or a massive attack on the Iranian energy infrastructure for fear of, and Josh alluded to this, the destabilizing effects on their own economies. And I don't think they necessarily would like to see Trump issue a call to overthrow the Iranian regime. And I think that's why we saw in the Arabic press this morning several articles alluding to Iran's desire to preserve the regime, which seemed to be a tacit Arab Gulf support for it. So I think to the extent that the Arab Gulf states have influence with the Trump administration, they will probably do what they can to prevent the Trump administration from allowing massive attacks on Iranian oil infrastructure for its knock-on effects on their own economies. And they would probably discourage the Trump regime from from calling for an overthrow of the Khamenei regime, but I could be wrong about that, obviously. I would just add, and this is really Chelsi's area, but I just add that whether Trump decides to listen to the Arab Gulf states or not, he has very close ties to the Saudis and the Qataris. I think at the end of the day now, Trump's in a mode where he's motivated more by ego, questions of legacy, and appearances of delivering success or appearing to be a winner here in this story, more than any of his specific ties to the Gulf. Thank you.
Thank you for this, Brandon. We're moving on to Dr. Harel Chorev. Harel, assuming that Iran is no longer able to provide patronage to Hamas, can no longer sponsor this organization, who might become sort of the heir patron to Hamas?
Well, I think first of all, I would say it's likely that Hamas will turn to the moderate countries, the Sunni moderate countries in the area, which are old-standing, we must say, a supporter of Hamas. Yes, today most of them would wish to see Hamas demise, no doubt about it. Countries like Saudi Arabia, which used to be a supporter of Hamas during the Second Intifada, and other countries. However, if Hamas will adopt a different approach, and they will have to in order to survive, I see a chance of rapprochement between those countries and the movement. Obviously, it's going to be a different kind of Hamas if they'll decide to go on this path. Okay, it's all conditional. Qatar obviously will try to stay in the picture, and I don't know if Iran, for some reason, will also stay in the picture because there are too many variables at the moment that we don't know regarding Iran. But let's say Iran will stay somehow in the picture. I don't see Hamas refusing, weapons or money or anything that they can provide them with. However, in terms of policy and geopolitics and alliances, I don't see the same composition we had on the eve of October 6th. So I would say most likely what we're going to see, as I said in my talk, is Hamas trying to get closer to Egypt and maybe to other moderate countries, which will obviously oblige it to adopt a diversified kinds of policies in many things.
Just a second, guys, just check that you don't have alarm because some of us already had to go. Okay, yes, Harel.
Not the one in New Jersey, I hope.
Not yet.
Okay, so that's it basically. That's the options that I see at the moment. There is a huge, you know what, let me say a word about Hezbollah as well, as though it's not really well, it is my turf, but not my purpose here. What we see with Hezbollah is a major thing. Hezbollah is the carrier of the Iranian state. The one that's supposed to give the second blow to Israel is not functioning. That's it. Hezbollah is done. In strategic terms, Hezbollah didn't fulfill its long time purpose from by Iranian I would say point of view. So on the same token, I think Hamas, even more than Hezbollah, will have to choose new allies and new people to work with in the sphere, in the area.
Thank you, Harel. We're moving on to Dr. Joel Parker. We've been asked a lot about Turkey and the way that this war is going to affect its gambit for regional dominance. Could you tell us about the Turkish role in Syria and Lebanon and how you see it affected by the war?
Thank you. That's a great question, in fact. Turkey was kind of missing from this discussion, which has covered almost every country in the Middle East. But Turkey is a very important player, and it's very difficult to predict what will exactly be the outcome of this, much less how Turkey might react. I think that what I read from Turkish people writing on social media is that there's a bit of mixed feeling about all of this. On the one hand, Turkey and Iran are not such great friends, and Turkey does have some sort of Schadenfreude in seeing Iran suffer after years of being enemies. On the other hand, this kind of almost powerful move by Israel that can reach, 2,300 kilometers away with massive firepower and essentially no global reaction stopping Israel kind of makes Turkey feel nervous. Like, okay, wait a second. If they can do this to Iran, what about us? And not that the Turkish military is the same as the Iranian military, but there is a sense that if Israel is a sort of unrestrained power in the Middle East, that we could have a new game emerging. And that's something I see also in Qatari media, by the way, that there's this kind of like sense that what happens if Israel emerges as almost like a superpower. And the Turkish government right now, led by Erdogan, does feel nervous about that and could try to enter into the Syrian arena in ways that would be a little bit counter to the Israeli interests there. Right now, behind the scenes, actually, there's more cooperation than we see in the public. There's a lot of rhetoric between Erdogan and Netanyahu in particular, who seem to be at each other's throats on media. Behind the scenes, Turkey and Israel have often been trying to carve out space so that there's no conflict actually in Syria. That could change potentially, but I don't know how. I'm going to leave it at there. I'm not a prophet, but I do see that Turkey is watching the situation very closely and somewhat nervously.
Thank you, Joel. We're moving on to Dr. Chelsi Mueller. You spoke about sort of Trump's efforts to, or hope to see a capitulation on behalf of Iran. And we were asked if Trump left during his first tenure, he left the original nuclear deal in 2020. So if such capitulation takes place, wouldn't be in practice be at the same point as where we were when Trump left the original agreement? How would that be different?
There we go. It's a good question. And I think the best approach is to compare the kind of deal that Trump is demanding with what we know about the 2015 nuclear deal called the JCPOA that was negotiated by the Obama administration. So what Trump is demanding is that Iran completely gives up the nuclear weapons program, the aspiration to have a nuclear weapon. And the deal that was negotiated by Obama actually left room for that. So initially, the JCPOA allowed Iran to have some limited enrichment, under 4%, followed by some sunset clauses on a number of different things. But take, for example, on the enrichment issue, the sunset clause allowed Iran, after 15 years, to increase its level of enrichment. And then eventually the idea was that this could potentially be phased out, although with the verification mechanism still in place. So it just had enough, left open the possibility that Iran could still imagine itself in the future as, joining the nuclear weapons club. However, what Trump is demanding is something like what South Africa did in 1989, when it just completely renounced its nuclear weapons aspirations. Libya, there was a similar thing. So no, I think that the kind of deal that Trump is trying to force Iran into right now would be very different. I'll end there.
Thank you, Chelsi. Amos, do we move on with the questions?
Yes.
Okay, so we have one for Dr. Rachel Kanz-Feder. Could you elaborate a bit on the way that this war between Israel and Iran affects the Shi'i-Sunni relations in Iraq?
Okay. Thank you. I completely understand that question and where it's coming from. I would say that most people don't realize that in recent years, Iraq has actually undergone, we can, so to speak, a process of, to a certain extent, desectarianization. Well, of course, there will be, and there are Sunni Shi'i tensions. I think that right now that prism is less relevant. and that actually when we're talking about the tensions that have bubbled up right now in Iraq in relation to this conflict, I think that the more relevant distinction or division is between Iraqis who support the pro-Iran militias and the rest of Iraqis who do not see the Iranian agenda and Iranian almost predatory practices and relations with Iraqi elements to align with an Iraqi nationalist position. So I think while that question is important to think about, I think, again, that the biggest distinction we're seeing right now is between those Iraqis who support the Iranian agenda and those who would like to advance an Iraq first and advance Iraqi interests above those that serve Iran.
Very much for that. And we have one for Dr. Joshua Krasna. We were asked about the implications of the Iran-Israel war on the war in Ukraine, given that Iran has been providing drones, ballistic missiles, and other types of equipment to Russia.
Two things to begin with. The first is it's going to be a problem for Russia now. I doubt that Iran is going to be able to provide them with the same level and expertise regarding missiles and especially drones as they have in the past. I think that there was sort of a honeymoon or period last year and the year before for Russian-Iranian relations where the Russians really needed something that the Iranians really knew how to give them. And I think that may be coming to an end because I think there's going to be significant problems in the Iranian military production system and export system in the future. I think there's a bigger question here, which I'll just sort of throw out, and which is when the Russians needed them, the Iranians stood by them in their war, right? The war they started, but their war, right? Once it started working out the way they didn't want to, the Iranians stepped in as an ally and really significantly increased their connection and their value for Russia. I don't know to what extent there is or isn't. I would be surprised there wasn't an expectation from Iran that Russia would do something of the same, and I don't think it's going to. I think one of the big jokers in this in where we are right now is if Russia decided, for instance, to give an ultimatum. Russia has a different Russia, right? But Russia has given ultimatums in the past to Israel when it felt that that Soviet at the time clients were in danger, and Israel had to take note of those ultimatums. I don't think they're there right now because I think the Russian relationship with the Trump administration is such that there's such a honeymoon between them. I'm not sure the Russians want to ruin it, but I do think that we will see in next coming months, next coming years, the Russians will help the Iranians rebuild their defense system, and when they help them rebuild them, they will become much more entrenched and much more embedded in it than perhaps they have been up till now.
Thank you, Meir. Meir.
Remarks?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me say the concluding remarks, very few concluding remarks. As Amos mentioned at the beginning, this is a cooperation between two centers, which I welcome, and I think it is very, very important. I hope we have given the viewers a comprehensive analysis, in-depth analysis. I hope that you will see it as an example of how Israeli academia, even at the time of war, is continuing its work, is pursuing its mission of providing sober, comprehensive, and I would say as objective, well, all Israelis, but as I would say, even-handed analysis of the situation. which is what is our duty as academics. And I hope you have a benefit from this webinar, and I'm sure that there will be more in the future. And with all will be welcome.
Thank you, Meir. I would add that we have many debates here between us, which is good. This is what we are trying to do, to debate about things and to reach to conclusions based on evidence. I think that I would close with a prayer for our soldier, for our hostages, and Am Israel Chai. Thank you very much for joining us.